Flirting with Indiscretion, a short story by Sasha Combs. Chapter 1. The Look. Jeanette wondered exactly what she was doing. She looked at the tasteful band on her finger, and all she could see was Nick's powerful hand, his long, slender fingers enlaced with her slender female hand. He was mid-thrust, and with every push his powerful surges inside of her body nearly took her breath away. Everything about this man was outrageously dangerous. She felt the muscles in his ass as each cell tightened into a concrete ball. Nick had a rigorous workout regimen that he never compromised. His body reminded her of a solid steel structure, every woman's dream, and millions of women worshipped and wanted him. But for the moment, Nick was inside of Jeanette. For the moment, Nick belonged to her. They'd been meeting like this for a few months now, moments stolen to experience an array of passion. He wasn't married, but she was. Nick had homes all around the world, but recently the loft had become his favorite place to be. Whenever they ended up in a hotel room, or the pricey loft that he so casually called his hangout place, when they met secretly, as most affairs are, Jeanette would tell him this was the last of their rendezvous. She would tell him that she wouldn't allow herself to get lost in their lust-filled connection. However, at every turn, her body would betray her. In her moments of weakness, Jeanette would step outside of herself, seeing how she looked when he'd convince her otherwise. She'd slink right back into familiar ways like a Benedict Arnold. Her core would moisten whenever she heard his sexy voice talking to her over the phone. When he touched her, the tiny hairs on her arm would stand on end. As for the rest of her, she trembled. There was something inexplicably electric about this man. His strong palms weren't like her husband's. His hands were such a contradiction, silky soft like a baby, yet powerfully strong. Nick's grasp made her feel like he wanted to possess her. His hands held purpose. He used them to give Jeanette precisely what she wanted. While on the other hand, Jeanette's husband had an awkward feel when he touched her. His caresses were light, with soft, gentle stroking, but he never appeared to know what to do with his hands. Whenever she made love to her husband, she was reminded of Hansel and Gretel, gingerbread houses, nursery rhymes. There was nothing sexual or erotic in their lovemaking. Straight sex was what Jeanette's husband enjoyed. When she'd met Nick and had allowed their love affair to begin, the memory of all she'd been missing had been lost. Nick had been so forceful. Jeanette knew with certainty no other man made love in the way Nick had made love to her. If they did, no woman would be able to hold down a job or successfully manage their career. Whenever she met the men she'd come to know as her lover, their sex would leave her totally exhausted. She could barely walk after their little interludes. Jeanette had a list of excuses to explain this wonderful feeling. However, she never spent much time examining her scrawl, because keeping that side of her concealed from her husband had been her only true concern. He'd been the only person she didn't want to ever get wind of this affair. Keeping her little dirty secret had been Jeanette's all-consuming concern. This had troubled her mind like nothing ever had in all the days of her young life. But that's the cost you pay when you choose to immerse yourself in lies. Jeanette stood in the shower with her back turned to the spray. She had a late afternoon meeting to go to. The last thing she needed was for her hair to get wet. The client she would be meeting was heir to a fortune. The Vandermeers owned a diamond mine in South Africa. They also owned an exclusive resort that catered to rich men who had boatloads of cash to spend. These were men who had nothing better to do than waste their time hunting down defenseless wild animals. They would ride in armored vehicles designed for a rich man's safari hunt. While riding in the back seat of a four-wheel drive off-road vehicle, these rich men would pull out high-powered elephant rifles. They would empty their clips into a pride of innocent, unsuspecting lions. The Vandermeers were set to open another resort in the middle of the year. There had been no write-ups in any papers or magazines, but that didn't stop the rumor mill from rolling. The speculation around the water cooler had been this new resort would be similar in extravagance, yet far superior than any resort they already owned. As a journalist for a travel magazine, getting the scoop on this story would be a big deal for Jeanette. The last thing she needed to screw up this once-in-a-lifetime moment would be to show up with her hair looking like an art project all gone wrong. Jeanette heard his voice before feeling the draft of air that followed. "Why the rush? You act like I'm paying for this suite by the hour." His choice of words slapped her like the dirty reality of what she was doing sometimes would. Hearing him say what he just said to her had made Jeanette feel cheap. She felt like the hookers who still took their tricks to raunchy old hotel rooms, the cheap ones where the management charged by the hour. She wanted to say something, but she knew his words had been innocently spoken. Nick was an American, but he'd been educated in Switzerland. He'd spent most of his life growing up there. Jeanette had learned a great deal about him after they started their affair. Nick's mother came from a royal family. His father had met her while being in that part of the world. Nick spoke several languages fluently. His English was perfect, but when he spoke, his words twirled with an accented form of English vernacular. Nick stood in front of the spray. His tall powerhouse of a body was like a wall when he did this. Jeanette had been cut off from the water. There was enough soap on her sex to lather up the rest of her body. He was doing this on purpose. He was angry over her leaving him so soon. But she told him before agreeing to meet with him. The interview with the Vandermeers was important. Nick knew this because he'd been the one to get her the interview with Amelia Vandermeer in the first place. "Nick, stop sulking like a baby. You'll make me late." "Can't you wait until I leave before you take your shower?" "Where's the fun in that?" He turned around to face her. Jeanette could see the play in his eyes. She felt the length of his sex when it came to life. His thick, long cock poked hungrily at her belly. She couldn't believe the stamina of this man. Some men have huge penises, yet they don't have a clue what they should do with it. They would tell themselves all women were turned on by their size. These men believed that by forcing their elephant-sized cocks inside of a woman, this act was supposed to thrill her into submission. These same men didn't realize, size aside, if you don't hit the right spot, all the thrusting in the world won't produce an orgasm. It might give her a thrill, but Jeanette wanted it all. She wanted the entire package. Nick knew how to use what his great genes had gifted him with. He would fill her up, then light her on fire. Nick would push every last one of her buttons. Then finally, he would make her come. With his body taking up most of the water, Jeanette's hair wouldn't be getting wet. That much was certain. His eyes lit with passion. She felt his hands when they rested on the sides of her waist. Jeanette, 5 more minutes. He was lowering his head as he spoke. He'd asked for 5, but she knew he'd get 20. Running from her cab down the sidewalk in her insanely high-heel shoes, Jeanette had tossed the money for her fare in the cabbie slot. Due to an unexplained traffic jam, the cab had come to a complete stop. With the restaurant being 2 blocks away, Jeanette believed she could get there faster if she got out of the cab now. She didn't want to be late for that meeting. After making love to Nick in the shower, her hair had ended up getting wet. Jeanette had to tangle her wet strands up into a tight bun. She would need to make a hair appointment before the day was out. She'd wanted to be angry at Nick, but how could she? He'd just given her an enormously juicy orgasm, using his sex as well as his tongue. You've been listening to Flirting with Indiscretion, written by Sasha Combs. To hear more of this story, tune in next week, or better yet, subscribe and check the button to be notified as soon as the next installation of the story has been posted to this channel. Thank you for listening, and please remember to tune in again.